everyone. I think we can make a start. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband, Chairman of the committee. To my right, I'm joined by my fellow councillors, and we will be making the decisions on the cases in front of us this evening. To my left, I'm joined by officers who will be presenting the cases and also offering us advice as we go through the evening. And this evening, the officer team is led by Fiona Ray, who is the acting head of development management, and Fiona is sitting on my immediate left. Can I ask, are there any apologies for absence?
None.
There are no apologies for absence, that's good. Are there any declarations of interest, colleagues? No, there are none. Turning then to, we have minutes of the meeting that was held on the 9th of September. I think Sam, you were present along with myself at that meeting. Can I sign those as a record for the meeting? Thank you. Good. Well, we'll get underway very shortly with the first case. It might help perhaps if I indicate the order in which we're going to take the cases. We're going to start in a moment or two with the applications at Moorland House and Talbot Grove House, then move on to Selby Court, Lower Addison Gardens, an application for advertising consent at Harrods, then Stanford Road, a Kings Road application, and finally the Council Depot in Pembroke Road. So if we can start with the first application, which is Moorland House and Talbot Grove House, and I think Emma Gore, Emma, you're going to introduce this, aren't you? So when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and a very good evening, members. The application before members this evening relates to a series of works proposed across the Lancaster West estate to the north of the borough. The works are designed to transform the estate to a modern 21st century social housing estate and improve the general appearance and thermal capacity of the buildings contained therein. The site relates to an area of the estate identified as Lot 3. Here you can see Lot 3, which is comprised of the two buildings which make up Moorland House, which is located to the west, and to the east, Talbot Grove House. These both contain residential units. Lot 3 contains these buildings which date back to the 1930s and are some of the oldest buildings located within the wider Lancaster West estate, which you see set out before you. The red line denotes Lot 3 and the blue line represents the rest of the Lancaster West estate. Please note the locations here of Moorland and Talbot Grove House, which sit adjacent to one another. The proposed development encompasses the following works: the introduction of brick slip systems across all elevations with a red, brown and buff brick, replacement of windows with timber sash and triple glazing, replacement of dormer windows with aluminium, insulation and waterproofing of the dormer windows and the roof systems, adjustments to the parapets, replacement of metal railings, alterations to the bin chutes, revisions to the refuse, waste and cycling facilities, and a number of other small interventions, including a mechanical heat ventilation system which would be located within the building and served by external vents. The works are designed to improve the thermal capacity of these buildings for residents and would indeed result in some improvements to the character and appearance of the area. Please see here some photographs of Moorland House. You will note previously that the sites are contained with a tight red-lined boundary, as the areas just outside, which are green landscaped with trees, are subject to separate and approved applications for landscaping and surface water drainage. These are photos of Talbot Grove House. And these are the proposed elevations of Moorland House. Here you can see the introduction of the brick systems on the right-hand side of the screen and a rendered image of the proposal. And these are elevations of Talbot Grove House, and again, another rendered image accompanying the proposal. The recommendation is set out in the committee report, and I would draw members' attention to the addendum report, which sets out some slight adjustments to the proposed conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. There are no speakers for this case. Colleagues, any questions about this, really? No? Okay. I mean, obviously, this is part of an ongoing and extremely large programme of renovations to what are housing stock that the council is the freeholder for, and well, nowadays, of course, manages as well. So. Very good. Well, I think if there are no questions, I think we can probably move to have a vote on the recommendation. So the recommendation is to grant permission for these various works as set out in the report. Can I see those in favour, please, the recommendation? So that is approved. Thank you very much indeed. Can we now turn to the North PAG and to the application for Selby Court? And I think Wade Banks. I think Wade, you're going to introduce this, aren't you? So when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. So the next item on tonight's agenda is the proposed development at Selby Court at 29 Somerset Square. This residential block of flats is 9 stories, and the building fronts Addison Road, but has the main pedestrian and car access point from Somerset Square. Although the building is tall, given the heights of adjacent buildings and the large setbacks, there are limited views of the site from surrounding roads. The best view of the site is from Addison Road, as can be seen on this image. Planning permission is sought in this case for the installation of telecommunications equipment at roof level, comprising of 6 face-mounted antennas, 2 300mm dishes, 3 cabinets, and auxiliary works thereto. The antennas will be painted to match the colour of the facade of the host building, and it is noted that the current proposals are almost identical to those granted permission in 2021. The officer has concluded that the proposed development would result in some harm to the appearance of the conservation area, less than substantial in policy terms. This is due to the equipment being visible, but yet painted to match the colour of the building, minimising its impact. The proposed equipment would, however, provide essential communications infrastructure for the Holland Park area, and on balance, it is concluded that the significant public benefits of an improved wireless communication network would outweigh the less than substantial harm caused to the appearance of the building in the conservation area. This concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Now, we've a speaker registered. I think Mr. Horrell. Good evening, sir. So you have up to 3 minutes when you're ready to make your representation. So please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you very much for the committee for hearing me today. I'm a resident within the building, and I live there with my young family as well. And the building is a fully residential building, and it reflects kind of the diversity of this borough, ranging from residents who've lived there for decades and decided to retire there, and young families who are just starting their journey and growing up in the borough as well. And I'm here today representing a lot of those residents who strongly object to the plans. And there are 2 key points that I want to get across to the committee today. The first is on the design of the actual submission today. So a large number of the residents strongly object to the design and having an impact on the local conservation area. It will be planted on the side of the building rather than on top of the building and be highly visible. And we actually object to some of the points where you could see this. You can see it from Addison Road, but you can also see it from several vantage points across the conservation area, including from Holland Park. And we feel this does not enhance or preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area. But moreover, it actually directly impacts some of the residents directly. So some of the antenna will be placed next to their living room windows. These are bay windows, and on the side of the window they are able to open on the side. So there is going to be some obstruction to their view, and potentially including light coming into those windows. And it's unknown at this point from the designs whether that would impact the ability to open those windows as well, which are used for ventilation purposes. But the main concern that the residents have been communicating to us as we've been discussing this is a more pressing concern around the direct placement of that transmission equipment on the walls directly on the side of our flats. So this will be placing the antenna on the side of our building, next to things like living rooms, bedrooms, etc. And when we read the planning application, there's currently no detail on signal strength or the public exclusion zones which are required under the ICN IRP guidelines. These exclusion zones extend both in front and behind the antenna and are designed to be the safe spaces where people can operate, both from a public perspective and also from a staff perspective. For typical 5G transmitter, the perimeter can actually extend as far as 50 meters. The extent behind is also something that needs to be considered. So the concern is by placing these antennae on the side of the buildings without scale diagrams that actually give us the dimensions of what could extend into our flats, we actually don't have clear guidance on the safety, how this is going to meet the safety guidelines in this case. And the risk is posed both to residents, visitors, staff in the building, and actually raises some liability risks within the building as well, depending on how far they extend. Ofcom regulates the providers, but they also place full responsibility on these decisions on the local planning officers to assure that these planning applications meet the safety standards. And in this case, we want to learn the lessons from Grenfell, where we can't actually take attestation from the application participant as the only thing. We should actually have all of the facts before we make a decision, and we should be requesting signal strength and the exclusion zone parameters to be directly applied, so you guys can have all of the information before you make a clear decision.
Okay, thank you very much. So questions to the objector. Emma, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Mr. Holland. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask you this one, but I've got another question as well. I seem to remember being on the previous planning committee in 2021, which granted another batch of installation. So were they actually implemented? Was that planning?
No, so this is the third application that's happened on our building. None of them have been implemented. So these are essentially speculative planning applications that they'll then sell on, I believe.
Oh, I see. Okay, so as far as I remember, that one was going to be on the top of the roof, and there are lots of different questions about that. So, let's say this may or may not be a question for you, or this may be one for the officers, but I'm unclear as to why, if previously all these bits and bobs were going to be on the top of the roof, they're now going to be attached to the side of the building. Can you explain that, or is that something I should be asking officers?
So I can give, so I was involved in the previous objections as well, and the previous design also put them on the side of the building to address previous concerns, because it was rejected the first time, and I believe they're continuing to do that, so I'll hand back to Wade on the purposes of putting on the side of the building.
Okay, so it's a speculative application, which then you say they're going to sell on or something. Is that what you're saying? I don't quite understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so they have actually not started building work on the previous application, so it's expired. So this is a re-application. So our understanding is the company that's applied for this is doing this speculatively for telecom companies to identify sites that they can get planning permission.
Okay. Okay, how confusing. All right, thank you.
Good evening. I'm very familiar with some of these cases. I represent a ward which also has some tall buildings very close to where you are, and they have been subject to similar applications. So I'm going to ask the officers about the safety issues that you raised. That's really important to clarify. But for the conservation area, because you are in a conservation area close to Holland Park, I notice that there's certain mitigation on this application that is supposed to make it blend in with the building itself. Does this application, as opposed to the previous ones, not reassure you further that this is more of a blend in than a sticking out from the top, if I can use those phrases?
So it does not. Both the applications have the same mitigations, which is essentially painting the antennas. But we've seen this in other installations where they still will stand out. They're going to protrude from the side, and they're going to be, directly next to windows and things. So it doesn't kind of help us in terms of mitigation in our view.
Okay, I will ask the officers about the safety implications, and I'll also ask them about the impact of the conservation area as well from their angle. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So our opportunity to speak to officers. Who'd like to go first? Emma and then Lloyd.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, I did. I was trying to get my head around the previous application, which wasn't actually implemented, and how different this one is to that, and how we can get away with doing this speculatively in a conservation area. I'm struggling with this one.
Yes, so no problem. So I can answer the question about the history. There are two previous applications. The first one was in 2015. That was for equipment on the roof. There was 9 antennas mounted on support structures. That was refused due to the visual appearance of the equipment being, in the words of the officers, amounting to clutter and visual harm. So that was refused at that stage. Then in 2021, the same proposals you see tonight were approved. The only difference really is the description seems to be a bit more straightforward in this round, but otherwise it's the same 6 antennas and the same 3 dishes in the same locations. So they're virtually identical applications. It is correct that that one has expired and hasn't been implemented, hence the need to reapply. I don't believe that necessarily constitutes speculative development, because these telecoms providers don't sell on the site; they don't own the site to sell it on. So it's not it's different to, let's say, a property developer buying a site, getting planning, and selling it on at a higher value. That wouldn't be the case in this case, because the telecoms providers wouldn't own the site to sell it on. If they don't install the equipment, it could be for several other reasons that might be related to matters outside of planning. For instance, the code, which is a whole legal separate issue where they require access to the building to actually install the equipment. There's a whole legal process to do that. That may, in some cases, hinder their ability to implement the schemes, but that's not a planning consideration, essentially.
Okay, thank you. I had another question, but I think Lloyd is going to ask it instead.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Banks, because I've been learning a lot about this type of application, and I've been very interested in your guidance over the years. Now, I'm going to ask 2 questions. One is about the impact on the conservation area, and the other one is about the safety. Conservation area, this is in a conservation area, is visible, and it will be visible. You're saying that there is a minimal impact on the conservation area. Could you just explain that, because this is quite a lot of communication equipment? Is it because of the blend-in? Is it because it's not on the roof, because the first one was refused? Or if you could explain that, please.
Absolutely, no problem. So the officer reached the conclusion that there would be some harm to the conservation area. This was based on the fact that there is telecoms equipment being proposed, and it would be visible. However, the officers concluded that, given the fact that that it would be face-mounted and painted to match the colour of the building, that this visual harm associated with the visibility of this equipment has been minimised, and ultimately reached a conclusion that that level of harm would constitute less than substantial, which is a policy term. Essentially, the National Planning Policy Framework requires decision makers to reach a conclusion as to whether the harm would be, whether it would preserve, or if there were harm, whether that harm would be substantial or less than substantial. And then there's a different policy test that results. So if it's less than substantial, then the public benefits need to outweigh that harm. If it is substantial, then there's a greater test to be met, essentially. So in this case, the harm is recognised, but given that it's been minimised as far as practically possible, and given that, yes, it will be visible, but it's not as highly visible as another tall building would be generally, given the wider context of the site, So it's not going to be visible from all around the site. The views are somewhat limited by intervening development. Given all of those factors, they concluded that it would be less than substantial.
Thank you. I understand that point. On the safety part of it, now none of us here are experts on this, but I understand that for this to go ahead, it would have had to have met all the nationally accepted safety standards, and that would include those in living accommodation very close to this, because this is not going to be above living accommodation. In some cases, it's going to be almost parallel with. So can you assure us as officers, as far as we're concerned as councillors, that if this does go through, it does meet all of those standards? Or is there anything else that we need to condition on this?
Absolutely. Health and safety concerns of residents I completely appreciate and understand. So in this case, for all code operators are required to comply with the ICNIP guidelines, that's public exposure guidelines, for non-ionizing radiation. And essentially that body, which is an independent body, has set these guidelines to accommodate all people at all times. So this is including vulnerable people. So a lot of the time we hear concerns from residents for more vulnerable residents. These guidelines consider all people at all times. Yes, there was a mention of exclusion zones. That is correct. There are exclusion zones as part of the guidelines, and the requirements as set out in law for these code operators to comply with is essentially to make sure that no one at any time could at any way possibly stumble into an exclusion zone. So if that is possible at all, then the equipment can't be installed. So that's why you often see equipment being stored on the rooftop of buildings, or when there are street works poles, they need to be 20 to 25 meters tall. That's to prevent, double-decker bus for it. This is just one example from accidentally strolling into the exclusion zone. So the fact that they are bound by that law, which is separate to planning, but as I mentioned in previous training, that health considerations can be a material planning consideration. But in this case, they've provided a certificate of compliance with the ICNIP guidelines, and they will be subject to that. And so for that reason, the officers concluded they've met their requirements for a planning application, and they're essentially that they would be governed by that law in any case. I was going to make another point on that, but it actually completely slipped my mind. No, but I think that covers your question.
Well, we need to make a decision. I suppose we've got to remember that telecommunications equipment, to an extent, enjoy a privileged position in the planning system. There are quite clear guidelines with a presumption that if it meets certain conditions, technical conditions, then there's a presumption that it will be acceptable. So, what do we think? Or are you happy if I just move straight to a vote? Yeah, just add something. Yeah.
Just really to recognise, I know the objectors here on behalf of a number of residents, and I know this is a concern. I should recognise it is a concern for many residents. However, with the planning restrictions, we are quite tied, because if it does meet the legislation, we haven't got much room to manoeuvre. My only concern was that this was impacting in a conservation area. It may not be a period building, but I don't think there's enough to say that it impacts on the conservation area. If it was a Victorian, different story, but I can't see any room to manoeuvre on this chair, although it's worth recognising the concerns of the residents on this.
Okay. Well,
Sorry, can I just say something briefly?
Yeah,
I mean, if this is essential communications that the area can't do without, and hence the planning restrictions, we've been waiting maybe 10 years for something to happen, so it doesn't seem that essential to me. So I'm a bit scuppered by that one, actually, that particular argument.
So I think we can probably move to a vote. So the recommendation is to grant with the conditions set out in the report, including obviously the technical condition that refers to the technical information that must be complied with. Can I see those in favour of the application, please? Can I see those against? Okay, so that's carried by 3 votes to 2. So Councillor Dencode and Councillor Durian voted against. Okay, thank you very much. So that's granted. Thank you. If we can now stay in the North Pack and go to Lower Addison Gardens, and I think Emma, you're going to do this one, aren't you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The application before members is for a variety of works to 12 Lower Addison Gardens. The recommendation is to approve as set out in the committee report. Conditions 4, 5, 6 and 7 were attached to the application to address residents' concerns with trees. I would draw members' attention to the addendum report, which just picks up a minor error in one of the paragraphs of that report. Thank you very much.
That was short. I mean, this is an extremely large property with having what appears from the description of the development a great deal of work being done to refurbish this enormous building, frankly. There are no speakers for this case. Do we have any questions for officers about this? No. Okay. No. So in that case, I think clearly there are a number of conditions, including for trees, which I know have been raised by a number of neighbours. So the recommendation with the conditions attached is set out in the report. Recommendation is to grant. Can I see those in favour, please? So that is agreed. Thank you. If we can now turn to an application for advertising consent for Harrods. And I think, Wade, are you going to do that one?
Thank you, Chairman. So the next item on tonight's agenda is an advert consent at Harrods. The advert consent is sought in this case for a temporary display of 2 adverts measuring 17.5 and 18 metres on a scaffold shroud. Scaffolding is required for ongoing repair works, with the advertisements being required in connection to sales and promotions of the retail unit. The officer has concluded that the proposed shroud, given its temporary nature and location, would be appropriate in the wider streetscape and would not harm the visual amenity of the area, nor would it adversely affect highway safety. As such, it is recommended to grant consent. And I would just draw members' attention to the addendum, which just makes one minor clarification that advertisement consent is required, not planning permission. Thank you.
Very good. Any questions about this application? No? I mean, it's quite large advertising panels, but then Harrods is an extremely large building. So I think this it's probably, I think that probably, says it all. Are there any questions, colleagues, to officers about this? No? Okay, well, in that case, the recommendation is that we grant the advertising consent with the conditions set out. Can I see those in favour of that, please? So that is agreed. If we can now turn to the application at 1 Stanford Road, and that's the South Pack, and I think, Wade, that's you again, isn't it?
Thank you, Chairman. So that's correct. The next item on tonight's agenda is the proposed development at 1 Stanford Road. This includes proposals for the excavation of a basement level beneath the footprint of the building and partially beneath the rear garden, with a roof light at the rear and a grille in the existing roof light to the front. They also propose the construction of a slightly deeper, full-width extension at low ground floor level with bifolding doors, and the creation of a terrace above the extension with new railings and a brick party wall on the southern boundary with number 3, along with planting and a trellis along the northern boundary. This would match the scale of the terrace at the adjoining property at number 1. Also proposes an infill extension to the existing corner at ground floor level, and the proposed new sash window and timber doors to the rear. The officers concluded that the proposed development would, subject to conditions, preserve the character and appearance and significance of the group of buildings and conservation area, and would comply with the relevant development plan policies. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I apologise. I will just draw the members' attention to the addendum, which makes a small amendment to condition 14 and draws attention to 2 additional representations received. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, there are no speakers, so questions. Sam?
Quick question to officers. There are objections to concerns about the increased size of the terrace, but I'm just noting in the details that the terrace has been stepped back with some sort of structure. So officers now satisfied that this won't cause an increase in disturbance and harm residents.
Yes, that is correct. Officers concluded that there would be no increased disturbance or loss of or harm to living conditions of neighbouring amenity. This is given the fact that there would be a very marginal increase in the size of the terrace, and the existing terrace is there. The planting on the northern boundary and the slight increase in the parapet wall will ensure there's no loss of privacy, and the very modest increase in bulk would ensure there's no loss of outlook or sunlight or daylight.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, then I think we can make a decision. So the recommendation is to grant with the many conditions as set out in the report, and also the amendments in the addendum report. Can I see those in favour of the recommendation, please? So that is agreed. Thank you. If we can now move to another advertising consent application at 500 Kings Road.
Thank you, Chairman. Just bear with me 1 second. I had the wrong one open. Okay. So the application at 500 Kings Road is again for an advertisement consent, this time for a temporary open weave banner mesh advert situated upon a fully working access scaffold. This will be located on the corner building, concealing the scaffolding behind. The officers concluded that the proposed development would be appropriate in the street context and would not result in harm to the highway safety. This is given the temporary nature of the works and the fact that the mesh banner proposed would reflect the image of the building behind, along with a smaller advert located centrally. That concludes my presentation, but if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Any questions about this, Tom? No? Okay. Well, in that case, excuse me, if there are no questions, then I think we can move to a vote. So the recommendation is that we grant advertising consent. Can I see those in favour, please? So that is agreed. Then finally this evening we have the application, which is an application by the council for its work to its depot at Pembroke Road, and I think Emma Gore, you're going to introduce this, aren't you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The application before members relates to the Council's Pembroke Road site, which accommodates office, the Council's depot, service yard and a number of residential dwellings above ground floor level. The proposal seeks the introduction of a single double door, access door, on the northwest elevation to allow access for plant and servicing. The door would have a limited impact to the character and appearance of the area, given similarly scaled openings along that elevation, and is considered appropriate. The recommendation is set out in the committee report to approve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions about this? just to clarify, we're talking about the southern part of the Pembroke Road depot complex, aren't we? So the residential accommodation above is Chesterton Square, which obviously is substantially above where the proposed development would be. Any questions on this? Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, the recommendation is that we grant planning permission with the conditions set out. Can I see those in favour of granting, please? That is agreed. Thank you. And thank you very much indeed, everyone. That concludes our business for the evening.